Okay, Raimy, welcome back. This is episode 3 of the Raimy. Um, Good morning to you. Happy, I don't know what you want to call it, 2025, I guess.
Thank you.
Right? That's what we're up to here.
That's what we're up to.
Okay, so welcome back to that. And to 2025. Here's to 2025. As always, raise a cup of coffee for it. And let's dive in. I thought, just to start this thing off as we're figuring out how to do this, I guess rather organically and without any hard prep, to start off with almost like a good of the week or a win of the week kind of a thing to start each and every episode with. That could be personal, a professional, a person, a thing, an organization, a project, a program, or whatever, just to get us going. And I'll give you the floor to start. How about that?
Sure. So mine is a little bit more than a week old. I found this about maybe
That's
2
fine.
weeks ago. 2 weeks ago at this point, but it's something that I've been enjoying very much. And that is a fundraising professional in the field who I know personally a little bit and professionally I've been following him a lot. His name is Ben Gonsher. He's been posting something every day for, I don't know what day he's up to, 20 something at this point, where he asks and he gives a 1 minute video every day, and he provides a question that he likes to ask donors when he's sitting down with them to speak to them about fundraising for his organization. And I've really, really liked it. And I found that I've almost started my workday by watching that video. I like it for 2 reasons. One, I think the content is excellent. The questions that he provides fundraisers to ask donors are really, really good. But the exercise in and of itself of putting the fundraiser and by that I don't mean asking for a gift, but asking for a probing question that allows you to deepen the relationship or allows you to understand the motivations behind that person's giving to a specific project or just philanthropy in general. I like that it puts me in that right mindset to start my workday, that this is where we should be coming at it from, a place of curiosity, a place of connection, a place of relationship building, a place of understanding that ultimately what we're trying to do as fundraisers is connect people who want to give away their hard-earned money to projects and people that they care about and good causes. And the only real way to create that connection and to do that in the best way possible is to ask questions and to peel back the layers of what someone's motivations are. So shout out to Ben Gonsher and just sort of helping me go into that mindset of here's what we should be doing as fundraisers. I've really found it to be an amazing, amazing exercise.
That's awesome. I've seen it on LinkedIn. I have not watched any of them, to be honest. Is it personal questions? Are they organizational connection questions? Like, what kind of stuff is he asking?
They're relationship questions, but they're they could be a question. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, and of course I'm blanking now, but it could be something like when's the last time you were super proud of a gift you made? Or something like that just gets the person talking and talking about the motivations behind giving. Some of them have been a little bit more specific to the program or to the organization, but they're open-ended enough that you get the person to just talk. And I think that is it's an amazing strategy to form a relationship in general. Just to ask questions of someone and sit back and then listen is really an amazing thing that I appreciate very much.
I'm curious. Is it framed in the space of, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I'm curious about it deeper, where it's leading towards an ask, or it's just in the course of every typical conversation, he's just following up with somebody or staying in touch with somebody, and he's opening up with this kind of thing?
I think he has the ask in mind. He is a serious professional fundraiser that is always concentrated on the next gift. But in order to get to the next gift, in order to get the most out of that next gift in a good way, you have to understand where the person's coming from. So I think he focuses a lot on that relationship building and getting to the bottom of it, so that when it comes time to make the ask, you can make the ask in a best way that, again, isn't self-serving to get the most money out of the person, but to get the most money out of the person so that that person is giving to something that is truly speaks to that person's core, their hearts, their soft spots.
Awesome. That's a good one. I like it. No, it's good.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull up on a professional as well here, and not particularly an organization. And I think that's a lot of value in highlighting people, not just programs, but highlighting people and good organization. He works at a great organization also, it happens to be. But independent of that is him as a professional is worth mentioning. Mine for the week is someone by the name of Ephraim Gopin, who I think you know pretty well, who did something which I thought was quite amazing and just finished it. which was a 366-day exercise in effectively email marketing. And every day for a year plus, sent out an email to his audience detailing a different aspect of email to think about in the nonprofit space. And it was an extraordinary effort. The professionals that he brought in to sometimes highlight their work. I think actually, did you participate in that at some point? You
I
did,
did.
right? So, right. I didn't merit that because I don't particularly do that. Maybe when I start releasing some AI products, I'll get there. But I just the yeoman's work in putting something together every day for a year. I know he didn't necessarily sit and write it every day, but he was setting it up that it was going out every day, and to be, the method and the process and the quality. At some point in the, like, I think the late 200 days plus thing, I was working on something for a client around donate buttons on their landing page. I was curious about fonts and colors for donate buttons, because when I was at the company at Cosmet, that was a thing. We talked about why the company colors were what they were, and when clients would ask about changing the color, we had a pretty standard answer about it. But this client was looking at maybe a blue button versus a gold button versus a red button versus they didn't know. And I honestly at the time didn't know either. And I was also thinking about fonts, like what font to use on a landing page and a person gets to donate page. And so I searched his emails from the year, since I have all of them, because who deletes anything in an inbox anymore? So I have all of them. So I searched through them. I found one or two, and then I reached out to him because he and I are in contact, and I asked him about it. And I referenced the email in the text to him. He was like so impressed and appreciative that I actually looked and not just reached out to him directly on it. And then he redirected me to two other people about the same subject and articles and things like that. But just the effort of putting something together, because I had thought about this, not that particularly, but a larger newsletter concept on a daily, and reached out to him during the course of this. And so I want to shout out to him for an incredible effort there. Real good content, real good value. If you followed it and you implemented on some of those emails and concepts and ideas and just strategies, I think you're better as a leader, and you're better in terms of how you're reaching, connecting to people during the course of your work. So kudos to him for that. And I'm excited to see what he's about to launch now, because he's onto something else. So
That's a great one. But before I comment on the project in and of itself, I'm curious, what'd you find of your fonts and buttons?
There wasn't anything outside of the typical, in terms of typical landing pages and web pages, in terms of what colors work for different kinds of things. I know that in terms of a clickable, so it's got to be a clickable that catches attention. So a lot of people use the Amazon colors, right? Amazon.com colors, because that's where people shop. That's what people shop and click, and maybe it makes sense. But I didn't find that as a color was any better than anything else. I did find that if you use annoying fonts or fonts that are hard to read, right, then like anything else, people don't click because they just think it's for lack of a better term, a smudge on the screen, and it's not enticing or engaging. So very much depends on the vibe you're going for, and the look and feel of everything else. At the same time, it still has to contrast to everything else. So if your page is green, you're not going to do a green button, right? You're going to do the opposite kind of a thing. There was an organization that I met with a couple of weeks ago, and they asked me to evaluate their homepage. And I said, I can't see your donate button, because it was basically the same color as the page itself. And so I said, if you're asking me not to donate, you succeeded, because I can't find how to donate, right? Or another one, there was, an organization that we're sort of both connected to, that for a long time didn't highlight the donate button at all. It said somewhere like donate, but it wasn't a button. It wasn't it wasn't an active sort of a mode. It was there. And so they checked the box effectively in having something, but they didn't accomplish anything with it. They recently, I think, updated it. But so it didn't yield much, but it was a worthy exercise, certainly for the client, to appreciate why we were going with what we were going, as opposed to something else.
That's great. Super, super interesting. And in terms of Ephraim's project, I'd say what I got out of it, what I learned as a professional from it, is the value of building systems. Because as you said, he didn't sit down at his desk every day to write that email.
Yeah.
I know there was months. He did that throughout the course of 2024, but I know that he was planning that and already executing it in some way in 2023. And that systems building is something that I know I personally struggle with. So just seeing someone else build that in a way that didn't seem overwhelming because he built that framework and system for himself was something that I took a lot away from. So
Yeah,
great.
From the topics to the writing to the people who he quoted to any, if there were any, sponsors or whatever that is, the links, the back end in terms of the email marketing system that he used for the newsletter, building the list, reaching out to people, getting that out in advance of 2024 so that on January 1 he started on time meant that he had put in hours and hours, weeks and weeks and months potentially of work in 2023 to launch an incredible program, I think, in 2024.
Great nomination for our first
Awesome. Okay, good.
Inspires of the week.
Okay, so good. I appreciate that. That's a good start to this week's episode. And our topic of the week is the following. I'm going to set this up with a scenario. You're a fundraiser. You run a really good organization. You ran your end of year campaign December 2024, and it worked. It was good. You succeeded. Congratulations. I don't know if you can celebrate on the screen here. That should be a thing they should add to the Riverside thing, is like celebratory buttons. I don't know. Like they can throw confetti kind of a thing.
Sure.
And now you're, it's only a few days into 2025. The way the calendar landed, 2025 started on a Wednesday. So you got the sort of you ended on the 31st. You took off Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and tomorrow or whatever the first day back is Monday, January the 6th, let's say. And what are you doing now now what? You succeeded. Congratulations. Now what? And then halfway through this conversation, I'm going to flip it and I'm going to ask you the opposite question is, you didn't succeed. The end of 2024 was not good. And I'm curious to see how those might be different in terms of how you go about this. So take it away from here. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions in this, but you and I spent a lot of time on this as a subject over the course of years. And I do think there's I do think there's a lot of strategy that can go into, like, okay, we did a campaign, we ended the year, it was good. Now what?
So thinking about systems and frameworks coming off that last conversation, that the framework that I think about fundraising within is the cycle of ask, thank, report. In every situation, in every piece of communication, whether you're talking to an individual major donor, whether you're talking to the masses, you're always somewhere in this cycle. Ask, thank, report. I did not come up with the cycle myself. I believe the first time I heard of it was from a fundraiser named Stephen Screen was the person that introduced me to it. I don't know if he came up with it, but regardless, ever since I was introduced to it, something clicked and it made sense to me that you're always in this cycle where every single piece of communication that you should be issuing to a donor should fall into one of these three categories. It should either be an ask, a thank, or a report. And the value of this system, there's lots of amazing things that come out of being part of this system. One of the things that I like about it is that it focuses you on what that piece of communication is going to be. So oftentimes when we sit down to write anything, we're just our thoughts are jumbled and we don't know exactly. We come up with putting a lot of different ideas into one piece of communication, and therefore the piece of communication is a little bit all over the place. But if at the top of the page we know that the reason for this piece of communication, or the reason I'm going to pick up the phone and call this donor, is simply to ask them, or simply to thank them, or simply to report back to them, then it focuses our entire message, and our message becomes less full of tangents and more focused on what we're trying to accomplish here. But to answer the question you asked me, coming off of the heels of a successful ask in the end of December 2024, your next piece of communication to people in the beginning of January should be a quick, a swift, and a super genuine thank. And you should reach out to those donors that made your end of year giving so successful, and you should thank them. And we can unpack that as much as we want and what makes a good thank you piece of communication. Yeah. But that's my answer to your question is that's what fundraisers should be doing now, is focusing their success from 2024 and thinking about how they can thank people in 2025.
Okay, so the first move now this week, and besides what I would call the automated thank you that came from the system, right? You're talking about a more genuine, sorry about that, a more genuine thank you from you. Now, when you say that, what's the breakdown on how that works? I imagine you're not sending the same note to everybody or the same speed at which you're reaching out to people in that cycle. That's what you just described. Sort of is effectively, I think, is the virtuous cycle of giving, right? If you give it the colloquial term for it, but the thank you could, dot the I's and cross the T's simply by just sending out another thank you. So take me inside from the writer's perspective, in terms of what you're writing and how you're writing that and how you might be doing that differently for different audiences and different donors. Because if it's the first thing you're doing in 2025, there's a way to get that right, and there's a way to get that wrong. So
the first thing that I'll say is that I don't view any of these things, the ask, the thank, the report, is as a task list of something that once you do it, you cross it off the list and good, I've done it. If we go into it with that attitude, then the automatic thank you that comes after someone donates accomplishes that. You've done the organization, you have done your job of thanking a donor because that thank you message went out and there's confirmation of receipt. But the point isn't to cross this off the list. The point is to build relationships with donors. And every time there's a give and take, every time there's a piece of communication, you have that opportunity to deepen relationships with donors. So every situation is going to be a little bit different. And every organization's resources are going to be different. Every fundraiser's time availability is going to be different. So I don't know that I can say here is the exact way that you, fundraiser that I'm speaking to, should thank donors. But I think in general, we can apply that framework of whatever you can do to deepen relationships with donors with that thank you is something that you should be doing. So I'm gonna use a very personal example of a conversation that happened in my house, I believe last night, for this to be super timely. As mentioned in one of the previous episodes of this podcast, my son celebrated his bar mitzvah. After this celebration, he is a much wealthier man than he was a month ago. We got some really, really generous gifts from friends and family that wanted to start my son off with a little bit of money in his bank account. And he got some nice presents, and he's super happy, and everything is great. Celebration is over, all the dust is settled, and the conversation turned last night to thank you notes. We have to get these thank you notes out. And a lot has changed since you and I were bar mitzvah boys and wrote our thank you notes. I remember back in the day, I was writing thank you notes for weeks, if not months after my bar mitzvah.
Still writing them.
You're still writing. There you go. And
horrible.
It was horrible. But now I'm going on a tangent. I think back a lot to that time because my parents were so crazy about me writing nice thank you notes, handwriting nice thank you notes to people. They ingrained it in me so much, and I spent so much time in each one. I put time into, and if it wasn't legible, I ripped it up and did it again. And I think it was a positive experience for me looking back on it, even though I absolutely hated it at the time, because it really did demonstrate the value of that thank you to me, right? They put so much pressure on me to do it. Again, and I say this lovingly in a positive way, that I was like, this is something that is really important. It doesn't feel important to me as I was doing it. But the fact that I can look back on it and say that when someone gets that thank you letter in the mail at the end, and it's actually good, and it's better than the other bar mitzvah boys thank you notes, there's real gratitude that's expressed. This person really appreciated the gift that I gave them. And so times have changed. Bar mitzvah boys are not writing handwritten thank you notes anymore. So my son is going to email everyone a thank you. And we started to design the system for this, the framework for this. What are the thank you notes going to look like? And he basically suggested that he spend time and he writes a template for himself that he's going to use to send all of these emails out. Someone else in the conversation suggested that we do some sort of mail merge. And I said, absolutely not. This will not be done through a mail merge. I can't help it. I practice what I preach. It will be done individually. And I said, in the other stipulation that I'm putting out there is I have no problem with my son using a template. I have no problem with everyone receiving essentially the same thank you notes.
He has to send each one.
He has to send each one. And the other challenge that I'm issuing to him is every single email has to have one line that's personal to the person that it's going to. So this email could not go to Bini because it only makes sense if it goes to the person that it's actually intended to. It can't be 100% copied and pasted. Every single email needs its own line. To which my son turned to me and said, okay, but grandpa and grandma's friends came to the bar mitzvah and gave me a nice present. I have no relationship with grandma's friends. What am I supposed to say in that email? And I said, it doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter, but we'll find something to say. And the example that I gave out was like, it's so nice that my grandparents' friends came out to celebrate this milestone with me. Whether or not he uses that exact phrase or not, I don't care. But that's a line in there that shows that it was only meant for grandpa's friend. And it's a really important detail to me. And so now, to bring it all the way back to our conversation here, I think the thank yous have to be personal. The more personal they are, the better. If you can make an individual phone call to every person who gave to you, that's fantastic. I'm assuming that most fundraisers are not able to do that. So you're able to send them another piece of communication, but make it personal. The more personal you can make it, the better.
So a couple of things that just jumped out at it. First of all, I assume he's not using the custom GPT that I built for thank yous. And don't tell him that I did it, but it's there. And he can personalize every single one of them, and he'll get ripped like I did on LinkedIn for promoting a thank you generator. And also, he should not be aware of the AI that exists that can copy his handwriting. If you wanted to actually handwrite every single one of them, that exists too. But I definitely hear what you're saying in the thank you space. Like there's a way to do that really works, right? Especially with certain donors in your organization, you're going to prioritize, I think, some of them over others in terms of you're going to extend something to everybody. But, the way I used to promote it was like your top 20% is going to get something either faster or more personal, somebody new. There's an organization I'm working with right now. They just got a donation. They seem on occasion to get these donations, unsolicited, 4-figure plus donations.
Wow.
Right? It's like, who are you? How did we find you? And I send them the nicest emails I can think of. And I just want these people to respond, just to start the process with us, right? And most of them don't. And it's weird, but spend the time on a good email.
Can I interrupt you? I'm sorry, but what is the content of that email? Is that a thank email?
Yeah, it's totally a thank you, appreciating their unsolicited support of this work, appreciating that there's a lot of appreciation in there, that they could support all kinds of organizations local to where they live, because in collecting the online donation, we get their location, so we know where they're based, right? So there's a lot of organizations they could support where they are and not one where this one is based. And they're supporting this also. And by virtue of, I do the homework, by knowing their zip code, I can see effectively on some level how well they live. Let's leave it in that, right? Using Zillow, a zip code, whatever it is, right? So I can tell when a person is going above and beyond with a donation to an organization, and when it's unsolicited. So you want to amp up the level of thank you. And the last part of that email is always I want to know why you did that, right? So I always invite the next conversation is, I'd love to get together with you on a Zoom or whatever it is, or a phone call. And a lot of the time I get nothing, which is fine. But
so my idea that I want to throw out to you is to change that email from a thank, and as counterintuitive as it may be, to change it to an ask, where the bulk of the message, you'll start with the thank you, but the focus of that message is actually going to be on that last piece that you said, where it's an ask to say, I need to know more about you. Tell me what your motivations are. I think just be interested if the focus of the message was on that next ask, as counterintuitive as that may be, given that they just gave you a gift. But the ask isn't for money, obviously. The ask would be for more information. But just, keep going anyway. I'm sorry.
No. So I was always a big fan of the handwritten thank you note. I picked that up from an uncle of mine in terms of handwriting stuff, especially today, because people don't. So when you do, it's a big deal. And I wouldn't say I force clients to do it, but I do highly recommend it to clients at certain times of the year to send gratitude notes to donors. And a great example, not from a client, I wish that these guys were a client, the Savannah Bananas. Do you know the Savannah Bananas?
Sure, the baseball team.
So the Savannah Bananas, he just put up the guy's awesome, that guy. So you can learn a ton from him and his marketing. And anyway, so they just posted last week a picture of 3,000 handwritten thank you notes. It took his team 4 days to write 3,000. Then I don't exactly remember who they sent them to, but it's been ingrained as a value in the organization that they do handwritten thank yous as often as possible, but to a very high number of people. And So I get that. Like, I definitely hear the appreciation piece. The other thing I'll add here before we move on to the next part of what you talked about is what I used to do was the second thank you. I used to when I wrote a strategy for thank you strategy, post campaign thank you strategy for any online campaign, there was the automatic thank you that went out from the system the day you donated, right? Then I would have organizations, prioritize their thank yous to donors, based on a certain set of criteria. As I said, early, high, new, whatever. And then the sneaky part was a second thank you. It was about 2 weeks later to do it again. And that second thank you, I think you wrote the language for it, but the idea was, I'm still overwhelmed by the gift that you gave a month ago, and I just wanted to thank you again. And the reason behind it was, I mean, obviously you're looking to maybe make another ask at some point, was to separate further. Nobody does the second thank you, right? And so, they'll do it maybe 3 months away from now, but they're not going to do it right away. So an overwhelming sense of gratitude to a donor 3 times in 1 month before you even report back or whatever you're going to talk about next, right? I always thought that was like beyond, because you're telling them that campaign was so meaningful and so powerful, and their gift was so important to that success that you're still thinking about them even a month later. I think was always a high mark for. I always like it if I get something like that from somebody when I'm a donor. So I sort of implemented that as a strategy, and I think it works beautifully.
So I can't help but come back to my son again, because what you just said hits the nail on the head. Also, like
WhatsApp's not a thing for him on the thank yous, video messaging. You're not.
Okay. So you're getting close to what I was about to say, because about 3 weeks ago, he got one of the first bar mitzvah presents he got, and it was he's very interested in engineering. He got this. There's a company out there called Hackpack, and he got an engineering kit. It's a monthly subscription or bi-monthly subscription, whatever it is, and it's an engineering kit. My parents and my sister split the cost of it and gave it to him. My kid was over the moon, and right away, unprompted, because it was genuine, I didn't even need to, and he's in communication with both my parents and my sister all the time. He takes out his phone. He either calls them or records a video of him, like, literally jumping up and down with the Hackpack box that he just received. About 2 days later, it's time for him to open up the box, and he gets started. And he spends about 45 minutes on it, and whatever it is, he builds the base of this thing that he's ever going to. Again, I'm not involved in this at all. I just, like, in the kitchen doing whatever I'm doing, hovering. I'm like barely paying attention to him as I try to do. He takes out his phone again, and he calls them again, or takes a video again, and he's like, look, he calls my sister Nini. Look, Nini, look, I just built the base of this thing, right? And then 3 days later, he got to the next stage, and he did it again. And it was like this genuine, and like, it's exactly what you just said. It was that second thank you. Like, it wasn't the necessary thank you that comes after the first gift. Here's thank you for your gift. It was this genuine expression of gratitude. And I would just imagine it came through. I haven't spoken to my sister about it or my parents about it, but like, I imagine that comes through. Like, he was legitimately appreciative of the present that they gave him. And if we had that attitude as fundraisers, to say, you gave this gift 2 months ago, exactly as you said, look at the outcomes that are happening in the building right now. That's your gift from 2 months ago. Thank you. Like that, flip it on its head. That would just be an amazing, amazing way to communicate with donors.
Yeah, that's why I looked at it. It was always like that, and very much strategically as a separator, and moving me or whoever is doing that strategy to a very small percentage of fundraisers who are that quote unquote good at the thank you, and to me, like, that was I'm trying. I know. And I know that a fundraiser knows that the person who's donating, and if they're a legitimately good donor to your organization, let's say they give you a lot of money, they're probably doing that elsewhere also. And so it's, as much as it's not a competition, it's still a little bit of a competition for dollars. And so whatever you can do to enhance that relationship or separate yourself by going above and beyond in some way. And an additional thank you is perhaps the easiest thing you can do to separate. It doesn't even require sending them something which might annoy them that you spent money on an item, right? Here, you're just sending another note. And if you go from an email to a handwritten note or from an email to a voice note, which I think you and I used to talk about sending people voice notes as donors, right? Like you separated yourself because you spent a minute or two thinking about that person minimally by just clicking the record button and sending that voice note, letting them hear your voice. It's genuine. It's not a script. It's your voice. It's your words. It's your emotion. So I think like that's the first part of it. And I imagine just to flip it before you get to the reporting part of this, because I think that's important too. If your year didn't go so well, your end of year didn't go so well, you're still thanking people, right? Even though you didn't hit your number, right? For whatever reason, you're still, that thank you is sacrosanct in the sense that like you have to do that. You should do that. Forget about that. You should do that. You have to do that as part of how the business works, right? And so thank you is pinned into the process immediately afterward. So okay, that's part one. What's part two here part three? Because you did the ask and now you did the thank. To talk about the reporting part.
So the reporting part it's similar to a thank, because I'll start it with this. Everything that you're going to report has to be couched with this all happens because of your gift, right? So in a way that it's another expression of gratitude, but whereas I view the thank as a little bit more emotional and less practical boots on the ground. Here's what's happening in the building. It's more of an expression of appreciation. The report gets more into the details because donors do want to see what the actual outcomes are, what is actually happening, but it has to be framed as this is the impact of your donation, which is not something that's so easy to do or intuitive, because oftentimes we start these sentences with here's what we're doing and look at us and you know, this is all the things that we're accomplishing. And if we're able to flip those sentences and say here's what you accomplished when you gave, here are the outcomes of your gift, and sort of take ourselves as the organization, as the service providers out of the equation. We're just the middlemen that are connecting the donor to the actual service recipients, to the people that are receiving the service. But then, with that framing in mind, the report is various case studies, which you can do. You can tell, I mean, I think you and I are in agreement on this, but we're fans of the individual stories to sort of show what the impact looks like for a single individual, a single service recipient that walked through your doors. If you want to tell the story in numbers through data, I think that's fine. There's a great place to do that, and to be able to show whether it's test scores going up if you're a school, or number of more people that you were able to service because your budget expands it, whatever it is. But it's a little bit of a look back to say, Mr. or Mrs. Donor, when you gave us, and here's the results of that gift. Here's what's happened, and then to give donors all of that credit for the amazing impact. That's the report.
So the way I hear that, and the way that when in my head I hear that, I see that is connecting the dots between the dollars and the impact, right? Drawing that line. Because you and I have talked about the idea that in the course of writing the campaign story, you want to draw the line between the problem, the solution, and the call to action. Here, what it sounds like you're saying is, I want to draw the line between your dollars and the impact that it had, and show you that straight. If you can draw that straight line and tell the story of that straight line between those two things, then it should be clear to the donor what the impact of their dollars is. At the same time, you're probably, I know I would do this as in the fundraising piece of this, or the leader of the organization. I want to make sure that that's always true, right? I don't want it to be sort of in the ether and unclear and ambiguous about how someone's dollars actually have an impact. That makes it really hard to do the work. If I can always draw the line between the donor and the impact, A, I'll save myself a lot of time in terms of trying to figure out how to tell that story. And B, the donor will more clearly and more quickly, more readily understand the impact that their dollars are actually having. So on the reporting side of that, A, it feels more natural, and B, it feels more meaningful when it's done like that.
Yeah, I mostly agree with that, and I might fully agree with it depending on exactly what you mean, because I tend to stay away from, I don't want people doing math in their head when they receive pieces of communication. So I don't want them saying, okay, I gave $1,000 to this organization and they're telling me X, Y, and Z happened. So that means that $250 went to the slide that's on the plate, right? So like we want to connect their dollars to the impact, but this is like such a subtle change in that sentence, but we want to connect their generosity to the impact as opposed to the actual finances that went into it. Once donors start doing math in their head, it becomes a little bit of a trickier ballgame to navigate.
Right. No, I definitely hear that. Excuse me. I'm thinking also just from the standpoint, I guess I get bogged down to some degree with board members and people on the team thinking through the math of the impact.
Sure.
But I definitely hear what you're saying, and I'm happy to amend the comment for the sake of that line, still drawing the line between, because I still think I always see when I'm working with somebody and I do that, draw the line between those things. If they can't, it's okay that they can't in the pre-work, because then they have refining to do and maybe reworking some of the language and maybe some of the logic, and that's fine. And then in the post, the same thing. Like, okay, people donated. Like, let's prepare this. People donated to your organization. They had an impact. What's the actual impact that they actually had? So draw the line for me between their generosity and the impact would be the same exercise, so that when they're writing gratitude emails or they're writing reports, they can, again, more easily and more readily point to multiple points of impact from their generosity. So I'm just sort of calculating the system on it.
So can you give me a good example and a bad example of what you're talking about?
Yeah. So on the front end of that, on the problem solution call to action, very often there is a lot of ambiguity around what the what, how, and why of an organization, right? They'll know what they do, or they know how they do it. Like Simon Sinek, they don't always know why, right? And so when they can't pull those three things together, very often their call to actions are weaker because they're ambiguous. They just don't have any sort of real pull because they don't mean anything, people, directly. So if you're able to more readily draw those lines and connect all three dots, you're in a much better situation. On the other side of that, if you're a fundraiser, an executive in an organization, or a board member, and you're now having to go tell people about the work that you do, if you can't draw the line between the person's generosity and their actual impact, you're going to struggle, because you can't tell people what they gave to in a meaningful way. You can't draw the picture. You can't tell the story. You can't show the child who's now benefiting from the organization's work, whatever that is. And so there's an ambiguity there, which hurts the donor, because it's like, oh, what did I actually do here? And then you're sort of always massaging the message to try to make it work, rather than being as authentic and genuine as possible and as easy in explaining it this way.
Do organizations generally know? Are they cognizant of the fact that they can't describe their why when they can't describe their why?
Not always. I sometimes I'll walk into a meeting, first or second conversation with an organizational leader or set of leaders. It used to happen, honestly, before you ever got to hear about a client and try to write their campaign story. I would ask the questions in one of my early coaching meetings, which was, well, why do you do the work that you do? Well, how do you do the work that you do? What do you do? And I remember distinctly, there's an organization I worked with that when I asked those questions, I got blank stares. Right. And so they weren't clear exactly on what they do or why they do what they do. Or you get disagreement among the team as to not necessarily what they do, but why, which is less an issue for me, because we can have multiple whys, I think, to some degree. There may be a primary why and a secondary why, or there's a reason why you do something as opposed to somebody else does something. Fine. There's a reason that draws you in. But if you're not clear on those, the what, how, and why, you're going to struggle. And often your why might not align with certain donors, and then you're trying to massage it to make it work. And then you've lost your authenticity by virtue of you're trying to chase a dollar in a donation, which is a real problem for you as a leader. So what you'll find, I think, sometimes too, is organizations will try to straddle being as real about what they are with the line of being just ambiguous enough to have the donor find themselves in them also, which hurts them. And then that's a real That's a real problem. Like I have this fake organization. It's not real. It's a project I use just for teaching purposes called Scrap City, which is, I think I've told you about this. This is about e-waste. And so when I first did it, like I didn't mean it. Like, what are we doing here? And I had to go back for myself and refine. Yes, it's a fake organization, but refine the why of the fake organization, right? What, it's like some would say, and for the audience sake, basically the idea here is every person in their house has a drawer full of dead cell phones, dead, iPods, dead iPads, and dead laptops and dead screens. And either they're taking up space or they're killing the environment at the same time, right? So my initial idea was I wanted the copper and the wiring because it's a lot of money and all that other stuff. And actually, in those situations, the value of the parts is actually greater than the whole, right? The dead product is worthless. The parts are worth a lot. But someone said to me, like, what about the environmental piece? And initially I was like, it didn't really faze me. It was more like as like a business idea, right? Like a 1-800-GOT-JUNK kind of an idea. And then I thought about it more. I was like, you know what? If I could clean up thousands of those empty drawers and actually get rid of the waste, there would be an environmental element. Does that move me or not, right? And so if it didn't move me, I couldn't use it as an actual legitimate why for the organization. It would be me faking it for the sake of trying to get people to support it or to buy into the work. So I had to figure that out. So like that's sort of how I think about some of these things. I don't know how I got to Scrap City, but I keep telling myself it's going to happen because I'm going to turn that into the first one-person gigantic nonprofit in the world and use all the crazy AI tools that I use. But there is that ambiguity that happens, and I think that that's a real important thing. And then also, I think for the reporting piece, if you don't know your why as an organization, it's your impact reports are sometimes off because you're not reporting on the things that actually are meaningful to your organization and certainly not to the things that are important to your donors.
That's super interesting. I like that very much.
It helps you lean in. Like there was an organization I worked for once. It was a school that had a lot of alumni. And my first interview with them, it was a real risk in saying this. But I basically told them that they were missing the message. They were telling the wrong story. They were telling the story of the institution and not the story of their alumni, right? I said, your alumni are way more interesting than your institution. And I knew that saying that out loud in the interview could either crush me or get me the job, right? But I was willing to take the risk because I really felt like they were off. And a lot of institutions like them are off on that. By telling the institution story, it's about them. By telling the student story, it's about the student, which reflects, anyway. And so I said it, and I could see like the light bulbs going on in the heads of people because suddenly they went from one story to having 5,000 stories to tell, right? And I was like, isn't that easier to tell the story of 5,000 people, individuals? Like you could tell those stories forever and realize that your impact isn't the institution, it's the people who come out of your institution over the long term. And it worked. So I think, so them having real clarity on that piece of it, it made the reporting easy, it made the impacts easier, made the why of the organization easier, made the fundraising easier for what they were doing. And it made them and their passion for it increased because it was like, who cares about buildings? It's about like people.
So that's super. It's super interesting. And if I can, I sort of want to play this out a little bit because I'm thinking of an example in my head. And I'm going to use a trick that I use when I write, but I think it might get us to the same point. We might have, I work with a lot of schools, so I think in terms of schools a lot, and a lot of schools will write something like, with your donation, you've prepared the next generation of students for the future, something like that. And that's a really nice sentence. You've prepared students for the future. They're prepared to tackle whatever challenges lie ahead after they graduate. What I like to do is challenge myself and challenge organizations to say, that's actually not a good way to report back. Why? Okay. Because I can't picture what that looks like in my head. If you were a screenwriter and you were making a movie of this, and you handed it to the director and said, okay, go film kids being prepared for the future. being able to tackle whatever challenges they have, the director would be like, well, you didn't give me anything, right? There's nothing there. I can't draw a picture of that. I can't put actors in a scene. But if you're able to, this is with a writing technique, but I think it's also true when you're talking to donors and reporting back. If you're able to literally, in some ways, or at least figuratively, draw a picture for them of what impact looks like in a way that they can see it, that you could hand it to a director and the director would be able to find the cast and they would be able to do it. So it would look like, whether that means kids staying after class because they wanted to tackle the math problem with their teacher and they're smiling and laughing. Yeah. Like that is something that we can cast. That is a picture of students being challenged and overcoming obstacles in their way. And it's a show don't tell type of technique, but I never thought of it in the terms that you're saying it, which is that it peels back to the why, because the easy way out is preparing kids for the future. That's an easy, but drill down a little bit deeper and tell me why is that important? And all of a sudden you're able to paint a much, much clearer picture of what impact looks like.
Yeah, I do the why exercise to an annoying level with leaders. The why exercise is just keep asking the why question until you get to a point where there are no more whys to ask.
Does that exist? Does that point exist?
Yeah. At a certain point, you hit the bottom or the top, however you want to view it, where it's like, there's nothing further. Like, okay, why do you want that job? Right. Okay. Why is that important? And why is that important? And why is that important? Because what ends up happening is you peel away a lot of the layers and you get to really the heart of what that person is actually shooting for in that. It may not actually be that job that's important. It's maybe validation for them as a human being or success in their work. And maybe that's more important than the why that's up here is the why that's all the way down here. And it's called the why ladder. And so you're playing why versus why. It's like, if the example they always give is you're driving in the car and you're going on a long trip and the kid in the back seat and they start asking you why. And it's annoying as anything. And then because they always ask why, and why, and why. And you want to wring their neck. Not actually, God forbid. No one should wring the neck to the I shouldn't even say that, even jokingly. But you're just like enough already. Like go play with your iPad, whatever it is, right? But there is a real wisdom to unpacking the why at its greatest depth. And I think one of the reasons is simply the ability to attach to the real reason you're doing what you're doing. And because all the other stuff is, I wouldn't say it's fluff, but it's not the genuine reason. And when you are tired, frustrated, annoyed, and it's not going well, none of those reasons are going to hold you to do the work. The bottom line reason will. And that thing pushes you through the annoying parts of the work. And it makes the work that you're doing at that organization not just palatable, but like passionate, because it attaches to this deeper notion, right? And so I think there's a lot to that. But yes, you showed me once, I think it was an email you showed me, it was a report from an organization. All it was a picture of a kid and like 6 lines of text. And that was their report, quote unquote, to their donors. It wasn't a thank you. It was like, here's Timmy, he's like benefited from your generosity among hundreds of other children, whatever it is, right? And it was not a complicated thing to do. It just, you had to do it. And so it served the need, which was the reporting back to the donor about a very specific kind of thing, which accomplished what it wanted to accomplish.
Absolutely. And the beauty of it is that it sets you up for your next ask, because you're able to turn to people right afterward and say, okay, we helped Timmy. Timmy's good now. Now there's 100 other kids like Timmy. Can you donate again? So Jimmy has the same future.
Right. When you turn over that cycle and you finish the ask, thank, report, even though we may have to bleed into another episode on the subject, because I think there's a lot we didn't get to here. Beyond the ask, thank, report is how many reports and how many thank yous potentially over the course of the year that you're doing, the other strategies that you want to employ to start out your year. But you're right. It more easily turns it over into the next cycle because people are connected to the story of the one kid potentially, or the impact of their dollars, however you want to sort of spin that in that particular space. Okay, cool. Okay, I think we should hold it here. But I reserve the right, if you're okay with coming back to this subject maybe in our next conversation, because I feel, A, we didn't get to the other part, or if it doesn't go well, what you're doing. And I think there's a lot of things under the hood in an organization that you're also doing following success that we didn't even get to. And I'd like to reserve the right to come back to that perhaps the next time we speak.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, awesome. So that is episode 3. Everybody who's out there, who's listening, who's watching, if you got to minute 53, congratulations to you. I'm super proud of you and impressed. And I want to thank you, because we talked a lot about thank you today. And just hit that like or subscribe button and share this with a friend. And if you know a Fry Go or Rebbe Gancher, shout out to them and share this with them, because I think they'll appreciate having gotten this from us, and appreciate their work going forward. So, Raimy, have a great one. See you next time.